that part a little bit later. I'll tell you when we get there. All right. You're probably going to learn more about TB today than you ever thought you might know about TB. And really to understand tuberculosis, you've got to understand a little historical perspective of it, because and why it's not just like a regular pulmonary disease like pneumococcal pneumonia or mycoplasma pneumonia or something like this. So we'll get started with that. I put this slide in here. TB's been around since prehistoric times. Some historians say this passage in the Bible, I'm not trying to preach at you, but some historians say this passage in the Bible reflects tuberculosis back in the days when this chapter or section of the Bible was written. So just give you a feel for how long it's been around. Consumption is the word in there. And inflammation and a fever, you just waste away and eventually die. Okay, what is TB? It's a bacterial disease usually associated with the lungs. It was the leading cause of death in the early 1900s in the U.S. About 1 in 7 people alive died from TB. And in Europe, it was about 1 in 4. It can occur anywhere in the body, reproductive organs, the intestines, the spine, the bones, the CNS, anywhere. What are the symptoms of pulmonary TB? This symptom complex you see here, people with COPD, chronic bronchitis, sometimes just upper respiratory infection, can cough for more than 3 weeks, cough up blood even. Some of the most common reasons for coughing up blood is not tuberculosis, it's sinus infection or bronchitis. Weight loss is one of them, but usually that's pretty far into they were sick for quite a while. Kind of a classic picture of tuberculosis in the lung. I'll try to mouse around so you can see this. This is what we call a fibrocavitary infiltrate in the right upper lung field and apex. This lucency is essentially a cavity or multiple cavities, and these others just infiltrate edema, fibrotic changes. This side over here is essentially normal, and this pathology specimen is kind of give you an idea of what it would look like if the patient died and they did an autopsy on it. That cavity is not necessarily caused by the bacteria cruising around in there just eating it up and spilling its enzymes. It's the body's response to try to kill this thing. It's very hard to kill, and it spills a lot of enzymes into the interstitium, and it starts chewing up the lung. And when TB heals, it heals with contraction and fibrosis. So if we was to treat this and cure it, the infiltrate would probably contract up like this, and the lung would do a compensatory expansion, and there'd just be a big old chunk of gristle. It heals by scar. TB's been traced back for at least 8,000 years. They found evidence of it in Egyptian mummies and the spines. They haven't cultured the bacteria, but there's characteristic spinal lesions that they think represent TB. I believe it does. And it's all over the literature throughout the ages. By the time we're through, we're going to have gone through all of this right here. It's an ancient organism. It's the perfect parasite. Where else can you be infected as an infant, live out your entire life, and die of a heart attack or just old age? Or down the road, we'll talk about infection and disease. 20, 30 years after being infected, you break down with active contagious tuberculosis and potentially die at that point. It could be anywhere in there. There's some historians that's estimated that's killed more people than all the other infectious diseases and wars combined throughout history. In fact, it's the #1 infectious disease killer on the planet still, and it has been for years. Let's see. We talked about the treatment of infection and disease and the family legacy of infection, and it seems like it might be inherited, but it's not. But what happens is A lot of times a grandparent will hold a grandbaby or something, they have TB, and be coughing, and they're not real sick, and they will transmit the infection to the baby. Grandparents pass away of natural causes, and the baby grows up being infected, but never develop the disease part, and then down the road, it develops the disease. Now, not everybody develops active TB, and you'll find that out here in a little while too. If you're a normal, healthy person, if you become infected, and we'll talk about this, you have about a 10% lifetime risk of ever developing an active contagious form of tuberculosis. There's some famous people who's had TB. Sometimes I debate whether to put this, where to put this in the presentation. A lot of authors, poets in the Romantic era. Let's see, composers, and you may recognize some of these people. Rene Laennec, he's a physician who invented the stethoscope. He had TB. Edward Livingston Trudeau, he was a physician. You guys might know the Doonesbury comics. His great-grandson was Whitestat. This guy built the first sanatorium in the U.S., Saranac Lake in New York. Doc Holliday, everybody's seen the movie, I think. Eleanor Roosevelt, the president's wife. Louis Braille, he was the man who invented the Braille type for people who were blind, had TB. Florence Nightingale, you can see she lived a long life, 1820 to 1910, so she had TB, but she didn't necessarily die from it at an early age. Tom Jones, he's an old singer, I don't know if you guys heard of him or not. And my associate, Hoyle, Dr. Lindsay, he was retired, recently retired, his dad had tuberculosis. Okay, this will be the last time I'm going to actually read a passage to you, but this is just so you'll get a feel for what's going on. It used to be considered a romantic disease back in the mid-1800s, late 1700s. It was thought it was inherited, or somebody who was just very tender. Alexander Dumas, he wrote, it was fashioned to suffer from the lungs, poets especially. It was a good form to spit blood after each emotion that was at all sensational, and to die before reaching the age of 30. This is, you were afflicted, it wasn't what we think of TB now. It was kind of mysterious back then. Okay, what are mycobacteria? And you probably will get some classes, or some, I don't know if you had your microbiology yet or not, but mycobacteria, tuberculosis is a mycobacterium, okay? There's about 150 different species in the environment. Most are not public health threats or contagious. They're found in the soil, in the water. A couple of them I'll throw out there for you. Mycobacterium avium is one that causes pulmonary disease in people. Cavities, it looks just like TB, but it's just not contagious. But it can, it can kill somebody. M. kansasii is another one. M. gordonii, there's a bunch of them. What makes them so tough is the waxy cell wall. It's hard for the medicines to penetrate and kill it. Even if you have disease produced by a non-tuberculous mycobacteria, which is like M. avium, it's a very extensive course of therapy. Treating TB takes about 6 to 9 months, contagious TB, and if you have pulmonary disease produced by one of these non-tuberculous mycobacteria, it's very simple. In tuberculosis, it requires high O2 concentration for growth. Y usually hangs out the tops of the lungs. Pericardium, it likes to go to the kidneys. In the CNS, there's a lot of oxygen. It's very slow growing, takes about 20 hours for it to divide. E. coli just does it in about 20 minutes. And that's one of the reasons it's so hard to kill this one, is it takes so long to do it. All right, when TB is diagnosed, when the lab calls you, they're going to say, we've got M. tuberculosis complex, and this is, every organism you see in there is potentially a public health threat. 95, 96% of the time, the organism is actually going to be M. tuberculosis. and then about 2–3% maybe is Mycobacterium bovis. And we'll talk about animal TB here in a little bit, which is contagious to humans and vice versa. Those other organisms you see up there are very rare and probably less than 1%. And then the bottom one is Mycobacterium bovis, the BCG vaccine strain, and that was developed in the 20s, and it was a vaccine that's still used in parts of the world, but it doesn't stop it from developing TB disease. It's used mainly in people with bladder cancer, and they do BCG bladder installations, and frequently urologists will culture some of the urine that comes back out, and then when it gets in the lab, the labs will tell you this is tuberculosis. And then you got to take the history and find out, is this truly TB, or something that potentially public health threat, or is this guy just had it, when you put M. bovis in the bladder, you're going to get M. bovis out. We did kind of not a real study, but just kind of informal statistical analysis of all the sputum specimens that we collected in the State Health Department from 2006 to 2009. And out of 25,457 of those, 20,579 were negative for any kind of acid-fast bacteria, which is what Mycobacteria are. And 4,878 were AFB smear positive. Of that 4,878, 3,181 were non-tuberculous mycobacteria. So they were M. avium complex. Some of the other ones I talked about, they're not a public health threat. People don't catch these from other people. They get them from the environment. Typically, they'll have some lung problems, history of long-term smoking or COPD or something like this, and they'll become colonized with these organisms. And then potentially down the road, they can develop a very similar clinical picture to TB. Now, out of the 4,878, 1,697 of those specimens were in tuberculosis complex. Now, between 2006 and 2009, we didn't have that many cases in Oklahoma, but there's about 5 positive cultures per case, and we monitor people's sputum to determine the effects of our anti-tuberculosis therapy on them, to be sure they're getting better, and that their sputum production is stopping and the bacteria are dying. Of that 3,181, these are the other organisms: M. avium, M. chelonae, bordonae, fortuatum, kansasii. M. avium and kansasii are most of the ones that are associated with pulmonary disease. Mayo Clinic did a very similar study, and I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but they got M. avium complex 42% of the time, and TB about 10% of the time. Now, if you can see that X-ray, I don't know how well you guys can see that or not. Can anybody kind of tell me where the lesion's at?
Upper left.
Upper where?
Upper left, left upper.
Okay. There's a little bit in the right too. Okay. Right up in here is a suggestion of a cavity and fibrotic stranding, and up in here is a little bit of changes also. Okay, where did TB and Mycobacterium bovis come from? They're ancient organisms that probably first appeared over 1 million years ago. It used to be thought that M. tuberculosis came from Mycobacterium bovis or cow TB and adapted to human host. Phylogenetic studies have disproved that theory. And this is just, I just put that in there to show you a phylogenetic chart. Okay. Now, this, you can read this on your own. I'm not going to read this to you, but this is to show you some historical perspective again. The great thinkers of the past were thinking about TB. It was still thought to be inherited, or somebody who was a weak character that developed TB, but some of the great thinkers were thinking that it was potentially something that was coming from that you were breathing at the time. Robert Koch, He's the father of TB. He's the one that identified the TB bacteria. He got the Nobel Prize for this back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And basically, he isolated some TB from cows, it inoculated guinea pigs, and then identified the same clinical picture in the guinea pigs. In fact, guinea pigs were very extensively used throughout the decades to study TB, the effects of mastications and transmission. Drop the nuclei, or the basic infectious particle of TB. It's aerosolized when you cough. The best way to look at TB or think about it is if you're sitting in your house, you got the windows open, or not the windows open, but there's no curtains there, and it's a bright sunny day, and you see these little fine particles kind of hovering in the air. That's what TB does. It's coughed out, and they're just real small. The contagious particles are real small, and the moisture evaporates, and it leaves the particle in the air that eventually inhales. TB cannot be transmitted outdoors. And I can tell you a way, but not pulmonary TB. Takes about 5 to 200 viable bacteria to impinge on alveolus for infection, not disease, infection to develop. Theoretically, just a couple could do the job, but as we get further into this, it's going to find out it takes about 8 hours, or at least they've done some studies that suggest it takes about 8 hours of continuous or cumulative contact with somebody who's got contagious TB to become infected. Yeah, and it also becomes more evident that TB is associated with poor ventilation and crowding. That right there, and everybody's probably seen a slide like that, that's not going to give you TB. It might give you a cold or measles or something like this. It's not going to give you TB. That's all going to drop right to the ground. Okay. Exposure, infection, and disease is kind of a continuum of events. You've got to have adequate exposure to become infected. It cannot be transmitted outdoors. It's not easy to become infected. You know, people panic when they hear the word TB. You know, I've heard somebody in that hospital there had TB, and I walked by it. I want to get my skin test. And seriously, that's what happens out here in the world. We have the 12 people walking well that want to be tested because they knew somebody in another state or heard somebody in the hospital had TB. And as clinicians, if you understand TB, you'll be able to help with this process. Once infected, only a small percentage of people develop TB disease over a lifetime. That's about 10%. And half of that, 5% of that risk is in the first 2 years of breaking down. Then if you can make it through that first 2 years, then you got about a 5% lifetime risk. Unless you've got some other condition that puts you at greater risk, like kidney disease, diabetes, etc. We'll talk more about that. Basically, TB infection, typically what happens is you inhale the organism, alveolar macrophages pick it up, it's into the lymphatics, and eventually white cells will surround the organism and create granulomas and wall it off, and that's the end of it for most people. It's called a granulomatous disease. There's many granulomatous diseases out there. Fungal diseases are granulomatous. They heal with granulomas in the lungs. Sometimes you'll see a chest x-ray. Granuloma could be this big, or it could be 5 millimeters. You can see them on x-ray. Patients are asymptomatic, and sometimes people want to do CT to monitor for stability, but frequently for effective TB, there's really no reason to do that. Histoplasmosis is a granulomatous process. Cancer typically is a lot of times we call it a granulomatous process. The basic differences between infection and disease is you've got bacteria in both instances. You've got a positive skin test. You have a normal chest x-ray. If you're just infected, you could have a granuloma or two. Usually if you've got TB disease or potentially contagious, you'll have a cavity or some kind of infiltrated nodular densities. Sputums are AFP smear negative with TB, and with the infection. And if you've got active disease or contagious TB, you've got AFB smear positive specimens. And that's a reportable condition to the state health department. And those non-tuberculous mycobacteria, until you decide to figure out what they are also reportable. Okay, because they're going to be AFB smear positive too. You just can't initially differentiate what they are. But there's some tests that we can do, and we'll get to that in a little bit, that helps you do a more quicker differentiation. Okay, this is a kind of an algorithm we developed to kind of help send this message home. You get exposed to TB, 90% of the time, no infection's ever going to develop. About 10% of people who are in contact for the right amount of time with somebody with contagious TB will become infected. That LTBI means late tuberculosis infection or TB infection. And then 90% of people never develop any disease. That's just it. That's the buck stops there. About 10% of the people will develop active TB. And 1/2 of that, or 5% of that, is in the first 2 years, and then another 5% is over a lifetime, somewhere along the remainder of the life. Mainly we treat them, and the vast majority are cured. There's no 100% in anything. Now, untreated, these percentages over here were back in the day of the sanatoriums. People were put away because they knew TB was contagious, but they had no way to treat it. And so to stop the high death rate in the country, 1 in 7 people dying, they just put these people in an institution. 33% died in the first 2 years of developing the disease. And 33% died later. TB can kind of, the body has a tendency to try, just depending on your constitution, to try to heal it, and it can. But then it stops being contagious, and all of a sudden you can redevelop it again. And it comes back, and then you're contagious again. Then they die from it. And then some people spontaneously cure it on their own. And that can happen. But we don't, in this country, we don't just wait for somebody to cure it on their own, because it could take 10 years. And frequently they'll have some scars in the apices of the lungs. That's kind of characteristic for TB. Doesn't mean it was TB, but they probably at one time, frequently we see this in the foreign-born, when they come in through immigration or something, they'll have old lesions in the lung, and it's suggestive of TB. And we'll treat those people, not necessarily for active TB, but for infection. We'll talk more about that here. Stages of infection and disease. There's potentially rapid killing of the bacteria by the alveolar macrophages, leading to no infection. Rapid progression of initial infection to overwhelming disseminated disease and death. And usually that will occur in infants. Kids, less than a year of age, can become infected and develop active disease and die from it in less time than it takes to get a positive skin test. If you become infected with TB, you won't know it right away. It takes about anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks for that skin test to become show positive. The fastest I've ever seen anybody that's normally healthy develop contagious disease is about a year after becoming infected. Now, if they're immunosuppressed, they'll have end-stage HIV or organ transplant recipients or something like that, they can progress rapidly. And then there's everything in between, from self-containment to cure, or to disseminated disease or reactivation. Multiple starts and stops. Okay, some world statistics. Just kind of give you a feel for this. It's estimated that 1/3 of the planet is infected with TB. That's about 2.3 billion people. In 2013, there was 9 million new cases, and there's about 1.5 million deaths in 2013. This is the WHO Global TB Report for 2014. They just came out with the 2015 report, but the numbers are still very similar. It's about 3 deaths from TB each minute throughout the world. Now, in the U.S., we don't have that much TB. It's because of public health. But we used to have a lot. Multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis is pretty dangerous. It's very hard to treat. Typically, a drug-susceptible organism that can be treated in 6 to 9 months with our standard drugs. If it's MDR-TB, which is resistant to isoniazid and rifampin. It's anywhere from 18 to 24 months of our second-line drugs, and usually injectable for 6 to 9 months. And the side effects are much, much greater with the second-line drugs. And XDR-TB is basically resistance to INH, rifampin, fluoroquinolone, and one of the injectables. And then there's totally drug-resistant TB. But that's, you don't see much of that. Give you an idea where most of the TB in the world is in China and India. This is on the slide. But they also have the greatest population in the world too. And it's estimated that in the Southeast Asia region and Africa, 60 to 70% of the population is infected. Okay. In the U.S., at the turn of the 1900s, that's the way it was in this country. Now, the highest incidence is in Africa and some places in Southeast Asia, and mainly in Africa it's due to the HIV. TB, if you're immunosuppressed, it really goes fast. And then this just shows you where the HIV in the world is, mainly in South Africa and some of these other countries. HIV is the #1 viral killer in the world, and malaria is the #1 parasite killer. Okay, in 1953 in the U.S., when they first started counting the TB, there was 84,000, a little over 84,000 cases, with a case rate of 52.6. Now the case rate's about 3.1, 3.0. Back in 1953, the population of the U.S. is about 150 million. Now it's about 322, 325 million. And we had, I'll show you another slide here in a second, but we had like 9,400 cases in 2014 in this country. It's estimated that 12.8 million people in the U.S. are infected with TB. Most of these people will never know they're infected. Unless you're in a profession where they do tuberculosis surveillance and skin test you or do a blood test for TB, most of these people will never know it, just live out their lives. Let's see. In 2014, there was 9,400 cases, or 9,412 cases. The new 2015 numbers will be out on Thursday, which is World TB Day, and they don't release those numbers until that day. So it's just around the corner if you're interested. Now, 65% of our cases or more in this country is imported from other countries. U.S.-born TB is just less than about 35% now. Most of our TB is imported from other countries. Most of it comes from Mexico, the Philippines, Vietnam, India, and China. We had 506 TB cases with HIV in 2014, and just 96 cases of MDR in 2014. In the world, they had like 450,000 cases, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it requires a lot of resources to treat that kind of TB. Reach down here. All right, in 2003, you can see that the percentage of TB cases among foreign-born persons in the U.S., the dark green is where greater than 50% is. It's foreign-born TB from those states. In Oklahoma, it's less. We still have predominantly U.S.-born TB in Oklahoma. In 2013, you can see that it's just, you can see why greater than 65% of our cases in this country for contagious TB are imported. Case rates, the highest case rates is where the big states where they have the big ports of entry to this country, California, Texas, has a lot of cases, Florida, New York. This is just a trend to show you over time the percentage of total cases in foreign-born has gradually increased since 1993 to about 65, almost 70% in 2013. Now, this number of cases has gradually decreased in the U.S. since that time, and this is just basically representing the number of foreign-born cases, not U.S. as well. And just a little pie chart showing you the countries of birth of foreign-born persons in the U.S. 2013. Mexico, Philippines, India, Vietnam, China. These are our main countries that we get from. Okay, Oklahoma. There's about 3.8 million people in Oklahoma. It's estimated that 150,000 are infected. That's about maybe 3% of the population. Most of these people will never know. We had 67 cases of TB this past year. We had 59 in 2014, 70 in 2013. So we've got TB. And the big problem with TB in this state is, and throughout the U.S., is delayed diagnosis. Because nobody ever sees TB as far as they're aware of. You know, they come in with a cavitary lesion in the lungs, and they'll get worked up for cancer or some other possibility, which on the differential is much more likely than TB, just because TB is just, it's not that common. But to forget about TB is potentially dangerous because these people with delayed diagnosis go around and infect their family, friends. They go to different doctors' clinics where people are compromised and sit in coughing, waiting rooms and things like this. And if you don't think about TB, you'll never diagnose it. We had 29 deaths due to TB from 2007 to 2014. We had 8 last year. Just kind of a graphic representation of the cases in Oklahoma. In 2014, there's 59. We had 67 in 2015, kind of goes up. And this is when I started right here, it's in 2005. Just incidence rates by county in Oklahoma. That is Harper County way up here. You know, and it looks like they've got a ton of TB, but they don't. They've got maybe 20 people in the entire county. So if you've got one person there, you've got a very high incidence of one case, if that makes sense to it. The greatest proportion of cases in the state is in Oklahoma County and Tulsa. But we do see them in Texas County, in McCurtain County, a lot of places where they employ foreign workers that are working in chicken plants, slaughterhouses and things like that. I can go into that one. Just kind of a graphic representation of the U.S. and Oklahoma case rates. The U.S. rate is in the red, and the Oklahoma rate is in the blue, and it's just a gradual decrease since 1980 to the present day. Okay. Transmission of TB. The probability that a person who's exposed will become infected to TB, not get the disease, is dependent on the concentration of the infectious particles in the air and the duration of exposure to those organisms. And this is from the CDC guidelines for preventing the transmission of TB in healthcare settings. And it's on their website. I'm sure you'll pick that up if you're interested. Okay, symptoms of TB again, we're going to get into something else, but I just want to remind you, greater than cough, greater than 3 weeks, potentially coughing up blood. We don't see it that often, believe it or not. Just a little thought. You know, when TB was real common in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s, and even early 80s, you could go to a doctor's office. And I can even remember my grandmother talking about TB, my mom. But you go to the doctor's office and the custodial staff can make the diagnosis. Now you go and nobody thinks about it. More frequently, it's multiple visits, and I'll describe a case of a high school student here a little bit. He's seen 11 different clinicians before he's finally diagnosed over a period of a year. Okay, here we go. Hippocrates, you guys can read this on your own. Another great thinker thinking about TB. It's a wasting disease. People frequently, these people, they get no treatment. When they first get treatment, they've lost 40 to 50, 60 pounds. Bad. But they should have been diagnosed. It's up to us to diagnose them way before it gets to that point. You see anything in the chest and upper lobes, or you just need to think TB. And the simplest, cheapest test to order is AFB studies or sputum for AFB smear culture. like ordering a gram stick. It's not more expensive. And frequently what you run into is somebody, well, let's get a bronc. They got a cab, we gotta get a bronc. Let's get A to B studies first before you submit the patient to that kind of expense for a bronc. I mean, what's an additional, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks for the test versus $1,500, especially if you can make the diagnosis with your suspicion. All right, this is kind of fun. Cal TB, Mycobacterium bovis. It's in that M. tuberculosis complex that we talked about. It cannot be distinguished clinically, radiographically, or pathologically from M. tuberculosis, but you're only going to see, well, if you see it, about 2%, maybe 3% of TB in this country is caused by Mycobacterium bovis. The rest of it is M. tuberculosis. Only way they can differentiate it is by biochemical testing, and Mycobacterium bovis is also universally throughout the world parasitomycin system. So that's a big clue. If you're drug susceptibility testing, you've got isolated parasitomycin systems, which is one of the first 4 drugs that are top of the line drugs. Then you've probably got bovis. The public health importance of M. bovis is you can consume unpasteurized dairy products and develop TB, from ingesting it. You don't have to inhale it. In a lot of countries around the world, they have TB in the cattle, and they don't check the cattle for TB. In the U.S., the cattle, a few cattle go to a lot or somewhere, and they skin test the cattle. And if there's a cow that's got a positive skin test, frequently they'll cull the entire herd because it's regularly transmissible amongst themselves, and cows with TB will usually die from it, or M. bovis. But they can get M. tuberculosis too from a ham, and we'll talk about that too. Most humans, we don't hardly ever develop active contagious disease. Most cattle will. And usually they'll fall out before it's ever recognized. Or they'll get them in an abattoir or slaughterhouse, and they'll notice the sickly cattle, and they'll start, butchering them, and they'll find lesions in the meat and the lungs that are consistent with TB. And then we'll have to do a contact investigation on the workers in there, because TB's got to be aerosolized, and you got to inhale it to normally catch it. So if them big saws are whirling around, cutting up that meat and stuff, then you've got aerosolization. And those guys, they're not walking around in 95 pounds in that job. Okay, I talked about other ways potentially you become infected. If you're dealing with cattle who's got TB or M. bovis, they produce a lot of mucus, a lot of air, and a lot of urine. They get in the barns, and they get all over the hay. And if you're moving the hay around, and potentially scratch yourself, cut yourself on the skin, you can be inoculated. Just like the mycobacteriology lab personnel, if they've got a culture of TB, they somehow inoculate themselves. You can get that. That's rare. Human transmission, it looks just like TB or MTB in the lungs, bovis does, but you just transmit it to different organisms, but it's a public health threat and it's contagious. Human, we give it to cattle back to human. Frequently, we had an elephant in Tulsa just recently who's got pulmonary TB, and it's M. tuberculosis. Now, how did that elephant get it? It might have been infected as a juvenile elephant in Asia, where it came from. It's just like 50-year-old elephant. They do trunk washings about twice a year on elephants to see if just to protect them from TB, to see if they're infected with it, or got disease. And they actually culture M. tuberculosis out of this elephant, so we've had to do a contact investigation out there. But it's M. tuberculosis, not bovis. And the elephant probably got it from a handler, one way or the other, along the road in its life. They can transmit to each other. Badgers frequently will have it, especially in England. Deer will have it in the U.S., elk. Deer will commingle with cattle, and that's how it works. I mean, people that have long-standing TB and delayed diagnosis, their pets will frequently have TB, but the pet will not die, and they'll think it's just a natural causes, but it's new.
Did you say that the cows have to be tested for TB before we can put them on the market?
Yeah, they test the herd, yeah, it's the FDA here in this country.
Okay.
FDA, it's US, whatever the agriculture department is. But yeah, they'll test one or two, they don't do the entire herd, but they'll test a couple in the herd. And then, of course, they have better inspection techniques in this country, but, if you want to believe that. And I tend to have a tendency, pasteurization is TB, just a little factoids. TB is one of the main reasons for pasteurization that came about back in the day. There was 35 cases of TB attributed to M. bovis and one infant death in 2004 in New York because of eating unpasteurized, unpasteurized queso fresco. And the New York City Health Department put a press release out. And then coincidentally, and not because of this, but the FDA put something out too, that they were culturing TB. They get along the border and they sample cheeses from Mexico, get some cultures, and they identified some TB in some of those cheeses. And so they put their own press release out. Now, extrapulmonary TB is more likely in bovis, if you think about it. Intestines, abdomen and stuff like this, because you eat it. If you inhale it, it's going to be essentially the same chance for extrapulmonary TB versus pulmonary TB. Does that make sense? Extrapulmonary TB, lymphatics, kidneys, heart, pericardium, oral surfaces. There's no difference between M. bovis and MTB pulmonary patients. Okay, and about the only way I can think that you will never have that problem is you will eat more chicken than you have. All right, any questions so far? All right, you got anything to show break for F5?